Hey y'all, welcome back. Thank you for tuning back into Heinous Beliefs Season 2, Episode 2. I appreciate y'all every single time you press play, you share the podcast, share an episode, or even just sit here with me while I tell these cases. So I try to understand as much as possible that I am talking about people's actual beliefs. So I do want to start off by saying I am personally, in my opinion, against belief systems, okay? It doesn't mean that you have to right now go and convert. I got a couple of messages. I'm not sure why the podcast is hitting certain people a certain way, but it's just gonna have to be a personal thing that you have to deal with. My goal here is to shine a light on how belief systems actually affect us in real time and how a lot of cases are overlooked, especially when it comes to religious theologies and when it comes to people having belief systems behind the things that they do. Some things are not just overlooked, but the root problem never gets addressed. So that's really why Heinous Beliefs is here. I'm not here to take anybody's God away from them. That is your problem. Okay. Now, that being said, I appreciate you guys for coming back. I saw the numbers go up for episode 1. So I just want to say thank you guys so much. So, yeah, let's get into the trigger warning. This is a heavy episode. If you're not able to sit through talk of violence or child abuse, please take your time. If you can't sit, that's understandable. Make sure you share it to someone that might be able to listen. Also, subscribe on YouTube, guys. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. If you're not subscribed, go do that right now. I appreciate you guys so much. But if you're going to be sticking around, go ahead and grab your tea, grab your coffee, get cozy. Eyes on the road. Let's get into it. Okay, so I want you guys to picture Rulo, Nebraska. Okay, Rulo, Nebraska is a tiny town. It's literally a blink of a town. If you blink, you'll miss it because it's only about 200 people living there. And in the 80s, that was the population number. So in the summer of 1985, federal agents roll up on this raggedy ass farm. Okay, it's on the edge of the town and they're looking for things that were stolen. They're looking for stolen equipment and doing a regular, checkup, investigation, nothing crazy, right? And instead of finding those equipments, they walk into something very gruesome. So when they end up finding two bodies, one of an adult male skinned alive and one of a child, a 5-year-old child, everything had to be paused, right? Everything had to take a backseat. And this was the Rulo Yahweh cult. And before I get into how horrific this gets, I need y'all to know who Luke and James actually were as people, because I'm not about to just just let them be just bodies. Luke Stice was 5 years old. He was a child that lost his mom. He had his dad Rick. From what people say that knew the family before this whole thing happened, Luke was just a regular little kid, right? He likes being outside. He liked being near his dad. He probably just didn't understand a single word of the theology that was being forced on him anyway. He was just a kid, right? So as any child that lost their mother, he just wanted to be loved. And then we have James Thimm. James Thimm was 25. Some reports say 26. He was a quiet dude, hard worker, the kind of guy that was looking for a purpose in life. But he thought that all of that stuff was tests from God. So this family that he found was the Yahweh cult. And both of these people lost their lives because one man had convinced the whole community of people that he was talking directly to God. And if you doubted him in any way, even for a second, you were doubting God himself. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Anybody? Yeah, that sounds very familiar. Now, let's talk about what really happened to these people, right? Because we got to understand what was really happening on this farm back in the 80s. So, late 70s into the 80s, interest rates are spiking, land value is tanking, families are kind of trying to figure out what to do. Farmers are losing their crops, they're losing their land, there is crisis, hardworking people are financially wiped out. Literally, people are trying to figure out what the hell to do. Michael Ryan is born in Nebraska back in 1948. He drops out of high school, bounces around jobs, he tries trucking for a minute. He really liked it until he had a back injury that pretty much took that away from him. So by the early 80s, he's unemployed, smoking weed pretty much every day, and basically looking for something, right? Anything to hold on to. What he does find is a man named James Wickstorm. Now, Wickstorm is a straight up hate preacher. He was very much into anti-government extremism with anti-Semitism and this warped idea that white people are the chosen ones from Israel Israel. It's called Christian Identity Theology, and it's basically custom built to give angry, desperate farmers someone to blame, and someone that is not the bank, someone that's not the actual financial organizations that messed them up. They also blame people that did not look like them, which I cannot agree with, right? So anybody honestly was to blame. So Ryan didn't buy into everything Wickstrom was preaching though, but he definitely took the parts that worked for him. And at one of these meetings, Wickstrom, he shows him something called the arm test, right? I think I've talked about this arm test in another episode, but you stand in front of Michael Ryan, you put your arm straight out. So he will take your arm, you have to put your arm straight, and then he's gonna put his arm on your shoulder and one hand on your wrist. And then he'll ask Yahweh a question out loud. And if he pushes your arm and your arm drops, that means that the answer is no. So he'll ask something like, should I let this man live, Yahweh? And if he pushes your arm and your arm falls down, that means Yahweh said no. But if your arm stays up, that means Yahweh said yes. That's the whole thing. That's the entire mechanism. And this man used it to ruin people's lives. He used it to choose who to marry, what to steal, whose baby was going to survive, who deserved to even have babies. And Ryan tells everybody that he is carrying the spirit of Yahweh. He's also carrying the spirit of Archangel Michael. And once people bought into this, there was no arguing with him, because any doubt that you had, God explained away as Satan working through you. So you literally could not, you couldn't ask any questions. So he meets the core majority of his followers at these meetings where he met Wickstrom. So he meets people like James Thimm, like I talked about earlier, a guy named John David Andreas, and a guy named Rick Stice. Now, Rick Stice was a widower, and he was the owner of this pig farm that they end up on. And the pig farm, again, is in Rulo, Nebraska, and he was drowning in financial debt at that time. Pretty much a lot of farmers were. And spiritually, after losing his wife, everything was kind of all over the place, right? So in the summer of 1984, Ryan and his people move onto that farm, right? He's promising Bible study, he's promising brotherhood and protection from whatever he was going through, right? This whole collapse in society, Ryan is here to fix it for you. Rick Stice is obviously someone with a large compound, so he lets them all stay there. At the peak of this compound, there were about 25 people living there, and this included children, about a couple of children under 10, and they're funding this whole operation by stealing farm equipment. They're stealing cattle across state lines, they're reselling them, and the money goes straight to guns. A lot of guns, lots of weapons, because Ryan is out here preparing these people for what he genuinely believes is coming apocalyptic wars, okay? Race wars specifically. So when he sets up all of this, again, he's using the money to set up guns, and he's eventually hoping that these people are going to go out and fight a race war. So he goes on to crown himself king, and I'm not exaggerating. He actually wanted to be the king. So that's literally what he called himself. He takes multiple wives, and then he calls them his queens. And when two of his own followers, James Thimm and Rick Stice, start quietly wondering if, this arm test thing, is it real? Because that's a little finicky, right? Ryan does not sit down and have a conversation about this with these people. He's not in the mood to talk about it. What he does is punishes them for it. He punishes them for asking questions. Again, does this sound familiar to anybody? I don't know. So Thimm and Stice end up getting demoted to what the cult called slaves, and they were made to sleep outside, chained to the porch. And in Nebraska weather, that is not, yeah. And that's when Ryan starts to put his intention on the child, Stice's son, and that is Luke Stice. This is a 5-year-old kid, and Michael Ryan decides that this baby is, and I'm quoting, a mongrel, okay, and the seed of Satan. He's 5 years old. Okay, so for the next couple of months that came up, he continues to abuse this child. It gets worse and worse. He's calling him dog shit. He's making him sleep outside. He's painting 666 on his back. He is shooting him in the arm. So he is dousing him with ice water out in the cold in Nebraska. And he also uses him as an ashtray. A 5-year-old child. Okay, he used him as an ashtray, and he shot him in the arm, and then he tied him and whipped him with a dog leash. He tied him up, whipped him with a dog leash. Then March 25th, 1985 comes around, and Ryan shoves this little boy hard enough that his head hits a cabinet, and he never gets medical help. Luke dies the exact same night, and Ryan makes Rick, his own father, bury his son in an unmarked grave right on that property. So yeah, the 5-year-old is now dead after being tortured for months. So, I guess Yahweh wanted that for a father to dig a hole and put his son's body in there just because Yahweh said so. I don't know. Now, eventually, Rick finally does leave the farm. Yeah, he left his own farm and he left for good on April 4th while Ryan was on one of his honeymoon trips with one of his wives. And it takes him months, actual months, to work up the nerve to tell federal investigators what he saw and what was happening and what happened to his kid because he was terrified of what Ryan would have done to him. This is a man that says he had the power of God and all that shit, right? So with Rick gone, Ryan turns everything that he had, all of the anger onto James Thimm, right? One of the slaves. So then on April 27th, 1985, Thimm gets accused of poisoning a turkey that the whole group ate. Okay, now this is another excuse, obviously, and what follows is 3 days of James Thimm being tortured in a hog shed. They literally turn it into a mini torture chamber. And I'm not gonna walk you through every single detail of what happened to that man, but some of it is almost unspeakable. And I honestly don't think reciting every horror does his memory any favors. So what I will tell you is he got beaten repeatedly by multiple men, including Ryan's own teenage son, Dennis, and he got whipped. And then they had different community members shoot the tip of his fingers one at a time. He was also skinned alive. They skinned him and then they broke his legs. Okay. And through all of this, witnesses say that he never once turned his back on his faith. He never once said anything bad about Ryan or God or Yahweh. He kept asking for forgiveness the whole time and still believing that some way, somehow, this was a test that he could pass. Yeah, that's what indoctrination does to you. Now, comes April 29th, Michael Ryan stomps James Thimm to death. He stomps him to death and he buried him in another unmarked grave, just like the little 5-year-old boy, not far from him, actually. So they're kind of side by side. And when Ryan's own son, Dennis, gets asked later why he took part in this torturing and killing of a grown man, he basically said he grew up around it and that's what Yahweh wanted. That's it. That's the justification. That's what Yahweh wanted and that was normal. So what are we supposed to do about that? So here is where everything falls apart. Fortunately for us, it's not even like they find these murders and they come to find these bodies. They were looking for stolen equipment. Now, in June of 1985, two cult members were picked up in Kansas and they were stealing farm machinery. They were stealing stuff across the fucking state lines. And while they were in custody, they start talking. They tell the police about the killings. Rick, once he finally feels safe enough, gives federal agents everything that he had. Late August 1985, investigators raid Rulo Farm and again, they're looking for farm equipment, right? And that's when they find the massive stockpiles of weapons, over 150,000 rounds of ammo. They had stolen property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then they find something that they did not initially come there for, the two bodies, the two shallow graves, Luke Stice and James Thimm. So eventually, Michael Ryan and his son Dennis and other members of the cult, they all get charged with first-degree murder. The trial gets moved to Omaha because obviously everybody's going to know about it. It's only about 200 people there. And the minute they're out of Nebraska and they're in Omaha, his defense attorney decides that this man is now insane. He starts to play the insanity angle and he tells the jury that his clients and his followers, quote, march to the drum of Yahweh, right? They're just deranged. They don't know what they're doing. Fortunately enough, the jury does not buy it for a second, and in April of 1986, Michael Ryan gets convicted of first-degree murder, and October, he's sentenced to death. Then Ryan, death row for about 30 years. He never gets executed, but he does die in prison in May of 2015 from cancer. So he spent 3 decades appealing the sentence and he never got acquitted. He was there until the day he died, right? But he never actually faced execution. Now, Dennis Ryan later wins a new trial, gets convicted down to manslaughter, and eventually gets released because he was a child. When a reporter asked Dennis years later how he felt about what his father was doing and his father finally dying, he doesn't hold back at all. He literally said, good riddance. Like, he's like, man, fuck that. Okay. Now let's talk about what actually is going on here psychologically, because I think this is where the real lesson lies, right? I want us to understand that Michael Ryan did not build this cult off of charisma alone. He built it because this were a group of people that were in economic distress and they were depressed and desperate. Okay. When you have a community of people like that, they are ripe for the fucking picking. Every single person on that farm was either financially wiped out from the farm crisis, grieving somebody they had lost. Rick Stice had just lost his wife and his farm, and everything else was failing. And that's not a coincidence, y'all, right? Like, cult leaders don't usually go after people who are stable and secure, right? They don't go after people that are, already critically thinking. They go after people that are already in crisis, people that want to feel special in situations that are just horrible. They look for desperate people. And I'm not saying like, oh, desperate people are always poor. There are some people that are rich and well off that still are desperate to be chosen. So desperate in that sense as well. And for somebody to even sign a contract like that, where an arm test is the way that you can verify something, I don't know. I don't know if we can just leave it up to brainwashing. There's a whole lot more going on here. And there's no counter evidence that you can bring to the table to say, oh, actually, Yahweh was not okay with this. Once Ryan told them that he was speaking for God and he was allowed to interpret what the test meant and every decision, who they married, who they talked to, at that point, you've made him overseer over your life. I want us to also remember that Nebraska, a rural farm in Nebraska, you're not going to find a lot of people wanting to stand up for themselves or stand up. And this is a town of 200 people. The minute you say one thing, you might as well never show your face again, right? So there's a lot of factors here that I hope that we eventually take into context. Religion and belief systems affect us in so many ways, right? Grown men are sexually torturing people. Grown men are shooting people in the arms and the legs. These are grown adults that feel like torturing somebody is going to bring them closer to a supernatural being. So yeah, that's the world that we live in today. And desperation plus isolation plus one unquestionable authority figure always will equal disaster. It will equal what happened on that farm. So I hope you guys can listen to this case and also learn something from it. I did sit with this case for a while before I kind of decided on how to tell the story without giving all the gruesome details, even though it still kind of ended up a bit gruesome. But there was so much more that happened to those people, the child and James Thimm, that I can't fathom how people can do that to each other. But I think the one thing that's able to make you do that to another person is belief, a religion. Now, Luke Stice never got to grow up. James Thimm never got to leave that farm and find a life and do something better for himself. Michael Ryan, though, had a great life. He was fulfilled. He had all the women he wanted, all the money he wanted, all the authority he wanted, all the fame he wanted. He got everything he needed. And guess what? He just died like a regular prisoner, while a 5-year-old was tortured to death, while a 25-year-old was tortured to death. So, I don't know. Pros, cons. Let's try to figure that out before we sell our lives away to just one authority figure that woke up one morning and decided that he was chosen by God. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for sticking around. I appreciate y'all so much. Thank you for rocking with me. Make sure you're subscribing. Make sure you are signing up for Apple Podcasts and Patreon to get extra episodes. I appreciate y'all. If you or anyone you know is in a high control environment, they are being coerced into relationships, they're being isolated and need support, the ICSA, the International Cultic Studies Association, has resources that will help you. They have a website called icsahome.com. If you are someone that is in an isolated situation, please call them. Again, you can also call the International or the Suicide Crisis Hotline. And if this episode brought up any thoughts of harming yourself, please make sure you call the Crisis Lifeline. There is a text message thing that you can send them. I think it's like 988, and you can kind of text back and forth if you don't want to get on the phone, or you can call them, either way. So I want to make sure that we use the resources that are being provided for us, and also make sure that you guys are drinking water, stay hydrated, take care of yourselves. I appreciate y'all so much. Again, this episode was heavy and they're all just going to keep getting heavier. I hope that you guys are able to take care of yourselves while you listen, after you listen, even before you listen. So yeah, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Bye. See you next Friday.